I want to give you a taste of a couple of the key ways I see recent developments in computing affecting manufacturing, and closing with perhaps the largest of the manufacturing industries in the world, single manufacturing industries, and the changes very briefly that will come to it. Now, having been on the internet for a long time, I've identified what I think are the ingredients that allowed it to foment an exponential revolution. And I won't cover them all in the short time we have today, but there's a couple I want to give some particular attention to. One is the arrival of open platforms as a way of doing business. You've heard about open source software, the software that's running in your phone, most of your laptops except for Windows, the web servers you're going to, where everyone takes what they build and contributes it back to the world. This idea is actually spreading now into hardware. This computer board you see here, called an Arduino, is open source hardware, which is to say that the design of the hardware has been released and is free for anyone to modify and anyone to make. And that's made it one of the most successful computers when it comes to making a small computer for prototyping. It may actually make sense, just as people in the software world learned, to take the designs for your hardware and let other people manufacture and improve it. Because no matter what company you are, no matter how smart your people are, most of the smart people in the world work for someone else, as Bill Joy said. And only this system, which allows people to collaborate, has let small projects come and take over the world. But another concept I want to give you is actually not the smart networks that Will mentioned, but a concept we call the stupid network. Now, back in the 1980s, the phone companies were selling something called the intelligent network. I don't know if any of you here are bellheads and remember this, but the idea of the intelligent network was they built a new generation of phone switches. And those phone switches could give you all the new phone features of the day. Call waiting, call forwarding. You got them on the phone that was already on your desk. Now, I'll just explain for the younger people in the room. People used to have phones on their desks, and wires came out of them, and they spoke on them. You can find them in museums. But the phone didn't change because the intelligence was in the network. The internet turned that upside down and said, let's make the network stupid and the edges smart. All of the smarts of the internet, this thing that changed the world so much, are not in the internet. They're in your phone, in your laptop, in your tablet, in the web server you're talking to. This idea of stupid infrastructure and smart edges is one of the internet's greatest contributions. Every industry, and the manufacturing industries, have to understand that. They have to virtualize and become software platforms. In fact, I'll go further and say that if you are not a software company, if you don't think of the value that your company owns as residing in large part in the software that you developed, I think you may soon not be a company in the 21st century. You need this flexibility for a very important reason. Neither you nor I have a crystal ball. We'd like to imagine we do. You pay me more, maybe I'll pretend I do. But the reality is we don't have this crystal ball. If you come to me talking about 2025, I can give you some ideas, but I'd be lying if I had some great certainty about it. Here's the problem. You need to make your plans for 2025, not with the knowledge of 2016, the way you're thinking of doing now, but with the knowledge of 2023, because people come to me with their plans for 2025, and I say, well, I don't know too much about your plan, but I do know one thing. It's wrong. It's going to compete with a small competitor who made their plan with the knowledge of 2023. Now, the only way you can face that competitor in the modern world, no matter what business you're in, is if you have the flexibility to change everything you do, because most of it lies in software. These are our landlords at Singularity University, NASA. They're not very good landlords, but they're great rocket scientists. And they send probes out into space, and last year you probably saw they got one all the way to Pluto. Now that probe was launched over a decade ago, so long ago that by the time it got to Pluto, Pluto wasn't even a planet anymore. Right? But the probe, when it got to Pluto, didn't have to worry about that. It was running new software just downloaded a few months before that did new types of image processing and signal processing that were not conceived of when the crew launched it so long ago. This is the sort of platform you have to be even when you make physical goods, even when you're in the manufacturing business. You must be based on software. Airbnb can rewrite their software and completely change what their company is, while other big companies cannot. This is how you must be if you want to compete with the young companies who are coming after you. Now, I'll talk a little bit about networks, and there's a lot going on, but one development I would like to point out was done by my colleagues at the Google X Lab, where I worked on the car I'm going to tell you about later. These colleagues are putting up balloons in the stratosphere, 20,000 meters up above the airplanes. The balloons just float. They don't have motors, but they can change their altitude. They can go up and down. And when they do, they can find winds at different speeds and different directions. And they can map these winds and keep the balloons up for 100 days, and that allows them to blanket economically an entire continent with balloons, providing radio connectivity to everyone at a low price. There are 3 billion people in the world who are connected to the network today. I assume most of you are probably among that number. But 4 billion are not, and those 4 billion will be. Their lives will be changed. They will have everything that we have seen, all the changes in our lives, and more importantly to you as manufacturers, they will become your customers. They will have the ability to see and order your products and understand how other people are using them and changing their lives. So if you thought it was great so far, it's going to double the number of people who can get to what you do through communications. I also want to mention to you something you're going to see later on today, telepresence robots. Now, Ray Kurzweil is going to appear in one of these telepresence robots, and I have done this myself. I attended a convention in London for 3 straight days, while I was also speaking at a conference in the United States. Now, here you can see me on the robot talking to a member of the convention. She is dressed like Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. Don't ask why, that's a long story. But I will tell you that this was not as good as going to the convention in person, but it was maybe about a third as good without the plane flight, the jet lag, and the hotel room. This is going to happen, and in your field, one thing that's really interesting is several manufacturing facilities in places like China are actually putting in these telepresence robots, which are allowing their customers to come and instantaneously visit the manufacturing lines at any time of day, look at what's going on, zoom in on things, inspect what's going on. So if you're worried about how global manufacturing has gotten, it's going to get more global and easy to make it global from this factor. There are other factors you'll hear about later that may reverse this, but it's going to become much more possible for you to interact more closely with remote manufacturing and remote supplier facilities as you move on in the world. Another technology that's going to make a big change is augmented reality, and we've seen some of this already with things like Google Glass. This is a video from the company Magic Leap, which has received $1.4 billion in private investment to make augmented reality glasses. Now, that's the largest private investment in history, but one thing you'll note when you watch this video shot through the glass is that the robot and the solar system were not in focus until the camera focused in on them. That's a remarkable achievement because while we can see 3D from having 2 eyes and by moving our heads, focus is the hardest thing to regenerate, and this gives people an impression so real that the way they got that money is they brought investors in, told the investors to pick up a cup of coffee on the table. The investors went to pick it up and their hand went through it. They were fooled. They thought it was a real cup of coffee on the table. They took that hand and then they wrote a big check. So that's one way to raise a lot of money. This technology will not only allow the telepresence to get better, it will also improve exactly how people remotely maintain things and control things. In fact, we see demos of the early starts of this technology in our innovation lab today. Now, a lot of people ask me about something called the Internet of Things, and I have some bad news because I start off by saying there is no Internet of Things. You can't go to the store and buy a thing and say, I want to plug this into the Internet of Things, please, right? That's a marketing phrase that somebody made up. But they were covering the fact that there are real trends going on, 3 trends and 3 technologies making thousands of applications which are indeed connecting everything and will in fact create billions and billions of connected devices. The 3 technologies are sensors, computing, and networks, and the 3 trends are as they're getting cheaper, smaller, and lower power. Now in sensors, you've seen, we talked about already today, if you've bought a phone recently, you're seeing all the new generations of sensors that are showing up. In computing, that's been going on with Moore's Law for a long time, but we've mentioned a couple of these small board computers, which are what everybody uses today when they want to prototype and experiment with new computing. I'd like to show you one of the latest ones to go out. Hod showed you a $35 Raspberry Pi. This is the new Raspberry Pi, pictured next to the American $5 bill because not to show its size, but to show its cost. This computer would have made it on the supercomputer lists in the late 1980s, and here it is available for less than the price of a cup of coffee. Now, it's overpriced coffee, we have to agree. But nonetheless, we're talking about full board computers less than your latte, and the computer is going to get cheaper. The latte is probably going to get more expensive. This is the trend to look for, things getting so cheap that we can do new things with them we never would have conceived as economical before. In networking, there are so many standards. It's great. You don't even know which one to choose. That's a joke. Now, there's a lot of hype around this. I said it was a marketing phrase, and it has generated hype. So I want people to understand this probably doesn't refer to the smart fridge that figures out when your milk is expired. Turns out your nose still works reasonably well for solving that problem. It's probably not your washer and dryer having a long conversation with your thermostat. Maybe about the weather. I don't know what they're going to talk about exactly. I'm pretty sure it's not video conferencing for your dogs, or Fitbits for your dogs, and yet people are trying to make that. On the other hand, look at these shoe tags. I actually bought these. They cost less than 10 bucks. They're the size of a watch battery. They last for a year on that battery, and you can do basic computing and networking in them at this low price and small size and long lifetime. I bought them not for my shoes, but for my cat. There is a law that says every cat has to be on the internet. I'm sure you're familiar with that rule here. Industrial applications are actually where the money's already being made. Here are sensors that measure everything that goes into a tank and what's going into a tank. Understand that every industrial process, every process in your factories and so on will, in the coming decade, be instrumented. You will know where everything is and what everything is doing, and it's going to be inexpensive. Plan for that, because if you don't, your competitor will be planning for it, and they will have a more effective process line, more effective industrial activity. These sensors measure gases coming out of land in a landfill, for example. The biggest dollar value, in fact, will be in the supply chain for the early days. Now, the supply chain isn't the sexy stuff we like to talk about at Singularity University. I apologize to those of you in the room in supply chain management, but it's so sexy that this is the best clip art I could find on the web to represent supply chain management. They don't make fancy animations and graphics to represent it, but it will become just a little bit more efficient, and that's going to mean billions of dollars for companies involved. When it comes to trying to make a big change, I look for things that actually affect people's lives. The Apple Watch, so far the jury's a bit out on that. The Fitbit got a big IPO, but a lot of people stopped wearing it after a while. When it comes to these health applications, we're still looking for the killer app. Killer app may be the wrong term for health applications, so forget I said that. If you're actually sick, though, there can be something to make a difference. This is a pill bottle cap, which can tell whether you've taken the pills off, taken the cap off, and whether you've taken the pills. That can be told to your doctor or to you. And if you have an illness that needs the pills, that could mean a real thing for you. But what's important to remember here is people are starting to think about technology that's so cheap they can put it in a pill bottle cap or even put it in a light bulb. This light bulb changes color as the day goes on. I don't know if that changes your life, but again, think about when technology is so cheap that computers and networking are showing up in light bulbs and pill bottle caps, in cups of coffee. That's what's going to change your business and how things instrument into the future. Intel, by the way, in fact, Hod showed this chip, but I like it as a visualization of Moore's Law. Intel made all the chips in your laptops and desktops, but they missed the boat, actually, on the small computing, until they came out with this processor, which, as you can see, is another one of those early supercomputers now fitting inside a camera memory card. Their first application for this was a baby jumper, and the baby jumper can let parents finally go out on a date after how many years, I don't know when you're finally allowed to have a date after a baby is born, but still be helicopter parents hovering over the baby and wondering what the baby is doing. Now, it doesn't actually tell you if the diaper needs changing. In their research, they found that babies come with a built-in audible alert system, which reveals when the diaper needs changing. Don't ignore the audible alert, by the way, because there's a chemical alert that goes off shortly thereafter, and you don't want to get involved with that. That didn't stop this guy, though, from making a diaper that actually does detect whether the diaper needs changing, and that's how cheap this technology has gotten. Here's a piece of advice, though, as you try and integrate all this cheap technology into your processes. This is a Google server room, and Google did something amazing when they were building their company. They were trying to build servers, and they didn't have a lot of money. So instead of the conventional wisdom of buying the top-grade equipment and the enterprise-grade disk drives and servers, they did something else. They bought the absolute cheapest crap they could get their hands on. Right? They put them on racks on wooden boards with bricks holding them up. That's how they built their server rooms. But instead, they designed it to expect that these cheap components would fail. By the way, the expensive components also fail, just less often. And so they said it doesn't matter whether or not it fails or how often it fails if we design it for the redundancy to survive. So when equipment in Google server rooms fails, nothing happens. It doesn't even hiccup. If Google goes down, that's on the front page of the newspapers. That's how reliable their servers are. And all that happens is a guy goes out once a week with a little hand truck, and he slots in the new disk drives and the new boards that need replacing because the system withstood it. This is the lesson when things get really cheap. Don't try and then use it to get really high reliability stuff that's still not perfect. Use the cheap stuff and more than one of it. Be redundant so that it can fail and so that you survive those failures without a hiccup. That is how you will provide the best processes to your customers, and it's an interesting lesson Google has taught us. Cisco, our partner, forecasts that all of these small technologies will in fact generate close to $15 trillion in value over the next 10 years. A lot of it from these non-sexy clip art things like supply chain management and asset utilization and employee productivity. They are important to many of the companies here. But some of it from the innovation space. And I'm still waiting for the grand change to happen there. And so I look for it in this word. I think that today, the devices in our lives, all the things that we carry in our pockets and that we have in our spaces and build, they're not nearly as aware as they should be of where we are and what we're doing. And I think we can fix that if we make our environment a little bit more connected so that our devices make our lives frictionless. That's what really will change our lives. Now, the main topic I actually talk about at Singularity University is a manufacturing topic, but not directly. And yet it's one of the world's largest manufacturing industries, the $1.7 trillion automotive manufacturing industry, part of the $5 trillion personal ground transportation industry. That is about to get completely upended by the self-driving car. I worked on Google's car that you see here. And so I want to give you just a very small touch of facts about that to whet your appetite for what to think about this in the future. Now, by the way, everybody who's working on this is going at it mostly to think about saving lives. 1.2 million people are killed around the world in car accidents, and that is one of the world's greatest diseases if it were a disease. And we have the potential to change that and change it around the world. And so this is what's driving people to go forward. But the consequences to everything else are going to be huge. And in fact, that entire automobile manufacturing industry is up for grabs. And I believe other industries can be as they are digitized, which is why I want you to learn a little bit about this one. The energy industry, believe it or not, is also changed because as people move towards buying cars by the ride instead of buying cars as cars, buying the manufactured product as a service instead of as a manufactured product, suddenly all the buying decisions about it change. People don't go to a car dealer looking for the car they're going to own for 5 years. They pick up their phone looking for the car they're going to use for 10 minutes, the way they do with Uber. And suddenly they don't care about the energy, the brand, the suppliers. All the old rules of that giant manufacturing industry are upended when it becomes digital. And we see two different approaches between the companies applying this. The car companies are taking a traditional manufacturer's approach. They're taking the cars they make, and they're adding computers to them, hoping to improve them and make them drive themselves. It's an evolutionary approach. But the non-car companies, the high-tech companies, they're taking computers and sticking wheels under them to see what happens. A revolutionary approach that works at the innovation pace of the computer industry for very different results. Now, there are going to be a lot of winners and losers in this space, but I believe the winners will not be the manufacturing companies, but rather the people who own the customer and provide that service. And this will happen in cars, and it will happen in your industry soon if you do not become aware of the way it becomes digitized. I want to mention one other thing. The big change here is that the engine is no longer the most important part of it. The computer is the most important part of it. And while the engine and the other parts of the car aren't on the Moore's Law curve, that computer and software are, and everything we tell you today and all those exponential charts suddenly apply to an industrial industry that has no idea of how to deal with it. Now, one last little touch I'll tell you that I'm also working on, which will change all sorts of goods, is the ability to build delivery robots rather than self-driving cars. I work with a company in Europe, and we have built these robots, which run on the sidewalks. They're going to be able to bring you anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza. Now, it's easier to do because you can't kill a pizza, and so the safety problems are simpler than carrying passengers. But these robots will be able to bring you anything in 30 minutes, order 5 pairs of shoes, try them on, throw 4 back in the robot and send it back. That retail store experience in your home will suddenly allow us to consider what the meaning of retailing is and even what the meaning of ownership of manufactured goods is. Because if you can get anything in 30 minutes, as this technology promises, for under $1, do you need to own things? All right, there are many things in your life that you may decide you don't need to own when goods move as quickly as data. In fact, I was going to use the name Internet of Things for this, but somebody went and stole it for something else. So big changes coming from robots, from computers, and from the digitization of all the products you make and the transportation that carries them. And so watch out for the future very much. Thank you.